The salt spray stung my face as I wrestled the heavy metal door shut against the howling wind. This was it, my new life, my new job, lighthouse keeper at the North Point Lighthouse. I, John, fresh out of Maritime Academy and buzzing with a naive enthusiasm, was officially in charge of keeping this stoic sentinel blinking its eye across the treacherous coastline. North Point wasn't just any lighthouse. It was ancient, a gnarled gray finger pointing defiantly at the churning Atlantic. The town of Oakhaven, huddled a mile inland, was just as old, clinging to the cliffs like barnacles. The locals, weathered and taciturn, spoke of the lighthouse with a mixture of respect and apprehension, their voices dropping to hushed whispers whenever the topic arose. The previous keeper, Jared, had retired. He was a man carved from the same granite as the lighthouse itself, quiet, weathered, and seemingly immune to the bite of the coastal winds. He'd met me at the docks, his eyes the color of a stormy sea, assessing me with an unsettling intensity. He hadn't smiled, hadn't offered a handshake, just handed me a thick, oil-stained logbook and a key that looked like it belonged to a pirate's treasure chest. 5 rules, he'd rasped, his voice like pebbles grinding together. Follow them, or the sea will claim you too. Then he'd turned and walked away, disappearing into the fog like a phantom, leaving me standing there, logbook in hand, the weight of his words pressing down on me. Inside, the lighthouse was a cathedral of stone and steel. A spiral staircase, worn smooth by countless feet, snaked its way up the tower. The air was thick with the smell of salt, damp stone, and something else, something vaguely fishy, but old, like the scent of decaying seaweed left baking in the sun. The logbook was my first task. Jared's handwriting was spidery and cramped. Each entry brief, functional. Dates, weather conditions, any unusual activity observed. I flipped through the years, the decades, a sense of history settling over me. Then I found a separate section, marked with a stark warning. The rules. My heart quickened. This was it, the key to surviving my new post. I began to read. Rule number 1. Never extinguish the light before dawn. The ocean is a hungry beast. The light is its leash. To break the connection before the sun reclaims the sky is to invite chaos. The creatures that lurk beneath, they see in the darkness. They crave the darkness. Do not give it to them. Okay, standard lighthouse protocol, right? Keep the light on. Makes sense. I continued. Rule number 2. Never speak the names of the old gods within the tower. The stone remembers. The sea remembers. The names are a key, a summoning. They are whispers on the wind, carried from the deepest trenches. Silence is your shield. Let the echoes of the past remain buried. This was unexpected. Old gods? What was this, a Lovecraft novel? My skepticism warred with a growing unease. Rule number 3. Always offer a tribute to the sea on the night of the full moon. The sea demands respect. It is a fickle mistress, generous one moment, vengeful the next. A simple offering will appease it. A fish, a song, a moment of silence. Something to acknowledge its power. Forget this, and the sea will take what it deems is owed. A tribute? Okay, now things were getting weird. But then again, sailors were notoriously superstitious. Maybe this was just an old tradition. Rule number 4. Never look directly at the water between the hours of midnight and 3 a.m. The veil thins during these hours. The creatures that dwell in the abyss rise closer to the surface. Their eyes are not meant for mortal sight. To meet their gaze is to invite madness. Look away. Always look away. My breath caught in my throat. This was more than just superstition. This was terrifying. Rule number 5. If you hear knocking on the tower door, do not open it. No matter what. The sea is a liar. It mimics voices. It conjures illusions. It will try to trick you, to lure you out. But there is nothing beyond that door but the cold, crushing embrace of the ocean. Let them knock. Let them scream. Do not open the door. A chill ran down my spine. This was insane. Utterly, completely insane. And yet, the weight of Jared's warning, the ancient feel of the lighthouse, the unsettling atmosphere of Oak Haven, it all conspired to make me hesitate. Could I just ignore these rules? Dismiss them as the ramblings of an old, eccentric man? Part of me wanted to, but another, more primal part of me whispered a warning. What if they were true? What if ignoring them unleashed something terrible? I sighed, rubbing my temples. I needed to think. I needed to get settled. I needed to prove to myself that this was all just a silly game of folklore and fear. I spent the rest of the day familiarizing myself with the lighthouse. The massive Fresnel lens at the top, gleaming like a jewel, its intricate mechanism whirring softly. The generator room in the basement, a noisy, oily beast that kept the light burning bright. The living quarters, Spartan but functional, with a small kitchen, a cot, and a bookshelf filled with nautical charts and well-worn novels. As evening approached, a thick fog rolled in, blanketing the coastline in a gray shroud. The mournful cry of the foghorn echoed through the tower, a lonely sound that amplified the feeling of isolation. I ate a simple dinner of canned soup and bread, trying to ignore the nagging sense of unease that gnawed at me. I told myself it was just nerves, the stress of starting a new job. But the 5 rules kept circling in my mind, their ominous pronouncements growing louder with each passing hour. Night fell, and the lighthouse began its tireless vigil, the beam of light cutting through the darkness like a sword. I checked the generator, made sure the lens was clear, and then retreated to my living quarters, tried to lose myself in a book. But the words swam before my eyes. The silence of the tower, usually a comforting presence, now felt heavy, pregnant with unseen possibilities. Every creak of the building, every gust of wind that rattled the windows, sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I glanced at the clock. 11:58 p.m. Just a few more minutes until the dreaded midnight hour. Rule number 4. Never look directly at the water between the hours of midnight and 3 a.m. Ridiculous, I told myself. Utterly ridiculous. But I couldn't shake the image of those unseen creatures, their eyes burning in the darkness, waiting for a glimpse of the world above. I forced myself to look away from the window, focusing on the pages of my book. But the temptation was too strong. I had to see. I had to prove to myself that there was nothing out there. Midnight struck. The tower groaned in the wind. My heart hammered against my ribs. Slowly, cautiously, I rose from my cot and crept towards the window. The fog was thick, obscuring the surface of the water. But as I stared, straining my eyes, I thought I saw something moving beneath the surface. A dark shape, vast and indistinct, swirling in the depths. My breath hitched. Was it just my imagination? A trick of the light? Or was it something else? The shape shifted, rising closer to the surface. A flicker of movement, a glimpse of something pale and glistening. And then, for a fleeting moment, I saw it. An eye, huge, black, and utterly devoid of light. It stared back at me from the depths. An ancient, unknowable intelligence, filled with a cold, alien hunger. I recoiled, stumbling backwards, my mind reeling. It couldn't be real. It just couldn't be. But the image was seared into my brain, burning like a brand. I scrambled away from the window, collapsing onto my cot, my body trembling uncontrollably. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block out the memory of that terrifying gaze. I stayed like that for what felt like an eternity, huddled in the darkness, listening to the wind howl and the waves crash against the rocks below. Finally, exhaustion claimed me, and I drifted into a fitful, nightmare-filled sleep. I woke with a start, the first rays of dawn painting the sky a pale gray. I stumbled out of bed, my body stiff and aching. The events of the previous night seemed like a fever dream, a figment of my overactive imagination. But as I looked out the window, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Scratched into the glass, just below the window, were 3 symbols. Crude, angular shapes that seemed to writhe before my eyes. I didn't recognize them, but something deep within me knew what they were. The names of the old gods, the ones I was forbidden to speak, the ones that the stone remembered. I stumbled back, my mind reeling. How? How had they gotten there? Had I sleepwalked? Had I somehow, unconsciously, broken the second rule? Panic began to set in. I had to get rid of them. I had to erase them before what? I didn't know, but I knew that I had to act fast. I grabbed a rag and some cleaning solution and began to scrub at the symbols, my hands shaking violently. They wouldn't come off. They were etched into the glass, as if carved by some unseen force. I scrubbed harder, desperate to erase them, but it was no use. They remained, mocking me with their silent, malevolent presence. I sank to my knees, defeated. I had broken the rules. I had invited something dark and terrible into the lighthouse. As the days passed, the atmosphere in the lighthouse grew increasingly oppressive. The fog seemed to linger longer. The wind howled louder, and the silence was broken only by the incessant creaking of the building and the mournful cry of the foghorn. I tried to rationalize what I had seen, to convince myself that it was all just a product of stress and sleep deprivation. But the symbols on the window remained, a constant reminder of my transgression. I found myself becoming increasingly paranoid, jumping at shadows, imagining things lurking in the corners of my vision. I avoided looking at the water, especially at night, but I could feel its presence, a cold, watchful gaze that followed me wherever I went. Then came the full moon. I had almost forgotten about rule number 3. Always offer a tribute to the sea on the night of the full moon. In my fear and paranoia, I had completely overlooked it. Now, as the full moon hung high in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the coastline, I knew that I had to act. I had to appease the sea, to offer a tribute before it claimed what it deemed was owed. But what could I offer? I had no fish, no songs, no gifts of any kind. All I had was myself. I stood on the edge of the cliffs, the wind whipping my hair around my face, the roar of the ocean filling my ears. The full moon cast a silvery path across the water, beckoning me closer. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, try to find some semblance of courage. I had to do this. I had to appease the sea, to make amends for my mistakes. I opened my eyes and began to speak, my voice trembling slightly. I offered words of apology, of respect, of gratitude. I spoke of the sea's power, its beauty, its mystery. I spoke until my voice was hoarse, until my throat burned with the effort. And then I fell silent, listening to the wind and the waves, waiting for some sign some indication that my offering had been accepted. Nothing. The sea remained silent, its surface shimmering under the moonlight. I felt a surge of despair. Had I failed? Was my offering not enough? Then I heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible sound carried on the wind. A whisper, a voice. It spoke my name. John, it said, the voice like the sighing of the waves, the rustling of seaweed. John. My blood ran cold. I knew that voice. I had heard it before, in my nightmares, in the depths of my fear. It was the voice of the sea. Come to us, John, it whispered. Join us in the depths. We have been waiting for you. I stumbled backwards, my heart pounding in my chest. This was it, the moment of truth. The sea was calling me, beckoning me to join it in its dark embrace. I wanted to run, to flee back to the safety of the lighthouse. But my legs were frozen, my body paralyzed with fear. The voice grew louder, more insistent. Come, John, come home. And then I saw them, rising from the depths, emerging from the shadows, their eyes gleaming in the moonlight. The creatures of the abyss. They were grotesque, misshapen things with slick black skin, sharp teeth, and eyes that burned with an unholy light. They reached out towards me, their claws dripping with seawater, their voices chanting my name. I screamed, a primal, terrified scream that was swallowed by the wind and the waves. I turned and ran, stumbling blindly towards the lighthouse, the creatures of the abyss hot on my heels. I reached the tower door and fumbled with the key, my hands shaking so violently that I could barely hold it. I finally managed to insert the key into the lock and threw the door open, scrambling inside and slamming it shut behind me. I leaned against the door, gasping for breath, my body trembling uncontrollably. The creatures of the abyss were outside. I could feel their presence, their hunger pressing against the door. And then I heard it, knocking, soft, insistent knocking on the tower door. My blood ran cold. Rule number 5. If you hear knocking on the tower door, do not open it, no matter what. The knocking grew louder, more insistent. And then I heard a voice, a familiar voice. John, it said, the voice tinged with desperation. Please open the door. I need your help. It was my mother's voice. My heart lurched. My mother? What was she doing here? How did she know I was here? Mom, I croaked, my voice barely a whisper. Is that you? John, please, the voice said. I'm hurt. I need your help. Please, open the door. I hesitated. My mind was reeling. Was it really my mother? Or was it a trick? A cruel illusion conjured by the sea? The knocking grew more frantic, the voice more desperate. John, please. I'm begging you. Open the door. I couldn't stand it anymore. I couldn't bear to hear my mother's voice in such distress. I had to help her. I reached for the bolt on the door, my hand trembling. I knew I shouldn't do it. I knew it was a trap, but I couldn't help myself. I slid the bolt back and slowly, cautiously, opened the door. Standing outside was my mother. Her face was pale and drawn, her clothes torn and bloodied. She looked at me with pleading eyes. John, she said, her voice weak. Thank God you're here. I need you to help me. I reached out to her, my heart filled with relief. But as I did, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Her eyes. They weren't my mother's eyes. They were black and empty, devoid of all light. The eyes of the creatures of the abyss. You're not my mother, I whispered, recoiling in horror. The creature in front of me smiled, a slow, cruel smile that revealed rows of sharp, pointed teeth. You're right, John, it said, its voice no longer my mother's, but a guttural, inhuman growl. I'm not your mother, but I can be. It lunged at me, its claws outstretched, its eyes burning with hunger. I screamed and slammed the door shut, throwing the bolt just as the creature's claws scraped against my face. I stumbled backwards, collapsing against the wall, my body shaking uncontrollably. I had almost fallen for it, almost opened the door to the creatures of the abyss. I knew then that I couldn't stay in the lighthouse. It was no longer a sanctuary, a place of safety. "You're right, John," it said, its voice no longer my mother's, but a guttural, inhuman growl. "I'm not your mother, but I can be." It lunged at me, its claws outstretched, its eyes burning with hunger. I screamed and slammed the door shut, throwing the bolt just as the creature's claws scraped against my face. I stumbled backwards, collapsing against the wall, my body shaking uncontrollably. I had almost fallen for it, almost opened the door to the creatures of the abyss. I knew then that I couldn't stay in the lighthouse. It was no longer a sanctuary, a place of safety. It was a trap, a gateway to the darkness. I had to escape. I had to get away before the sea claimed me completely. I packed a small bag with some food, water, and a few essentials. I grabbed the logbook, the key, and a flashlight, and then I started to climb. I climbed the spiral staircase, up and up, toward the top of the tower, towards the light. I knew that the creatures of the abyss were behind me, their claws scraping against the stone, their voices whispering my name. But I didn't stop. I kept climbing, driven by a desperate need to escape, to survive. Finally, I reached the top of the tower. I threw open the door to the lantern room and stepped out onto the narrow balcony that surrounded the Fresnel lens. The wind was howling. The waves were crashing against the rocks below, and the fog was so thick that I could barely see a few feet in front of me. But I didn't care. I was out of the tower. I was free. I started to make my way around the balcony, towards the stairs that led down to the cliffs. But as I did, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. A creaking sound. I looked up and saw that the Fresnel lens, the massive, intricate structure that housed the light, was beginning to tilt. Slowly, inexorably, it was tipping over the edge of the balcony. I realized what was happening. The creatures of the abyss were trying to extinguish the light, to plunge the coastline into darkness. If they succeeded, all would be lost. The ships at sea would be stranded. The town of Oakhaven would be vulnerable, and the creatures of the abyss would be free to roam the land. I had to stop them. I ran towards the lens, grabbing onto one of the metal supports, trying to steady it. But it was too heavy, too far gone. The lens continued to tilt, its weight pulling me with it. I knew that I couldn't hold on much longer. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, preparing myself for the inevitable. But then I remembered something. Rule number 1, never extinguish the light before dawn. The ocean is a hungry beast. The light is its leash. I couldn't let the light go out. I couldn't let the creatures of the abyss win. I opened my eyes and looked out at the sea. The fog had lifted slightly, revealing the dark, churning waters below. And then I saw them, the creatures of the abyss. They were gathered at the base of the lighthouse, their eyes fixed on the light, their mouths open in anticipation. They were waiting for the darkness. I knew what I had to do. I took a deep breath and let go of the lens. I plunged into the darkness, falling towards the sea. As I fell, I saw the lens tip over the edge of the balcony and crash into the water below. The light went out, but as the darkness closed in around me, I felt a surge of peace. I had done my duty. I had protected the light. I hit the water with a splash, the cold shock stealing my breath away. I sank beneath the surface, the darkness pressing in on me from all sides. I could feel the creatures of the abyss closing in, their eyes burning in the darkness. They were coming for me, but I wasn't afraid. I had accepted my fate. I had made my peace with the sea. As the creatures of the abyss reached out to claim me, I closed my eyes and smiled. And then I saw it, a faint glimmer of light breaking through the darkness. The sun. It was dawn. The creatures of the abyss recoiled, their eyes burning in the light. They retreated back into the depths, their hunger unfulfilled. I floated to the surface, gasping for air, the first rays of sunlight warming my skin. I had survived. The lighthouse was dark, the lens shattered, but the light had returned. The creatures of the abyss had been defeated. I swam towards the shore, my body exhausted, my spirit broken. I had lost everything, my job, my home, my sense of security. But I had also gained something, a knowledge of the darkness that lurked beneath the surface of the world, a respect for the power of the sea, and a newfound appreciation for the light. I stumbled onto the beach, collapsing onto the sand, the warmth of the sun seeping into my bones. I looked back at the lighthouse, its dark silhouette standing against the pale morning sky. It was no longer a symbol of safety, of hope. It was a reminder of the darkness, of the horrors that I had faced. But it was also a reminder of my own courage, my own resilience. I had survived. I had faced the darkness and emerged victorious. I knew that I could never return to the lighthouse. The memories were too raw, the scars too deep. But I also knew that I could never forget what had happened there. The 5 rules, the creatures of the abyss, the sacrifice I had made. They would stay with me forever. A constant reminder of the darkness that lurks beneath the surface of the world. As I walked away from the beach towards the town of Oak Haven, I knew that my life would never be the same. I was no longer the naive, enthusiastic young man who had arrived at the lighthouse just a few weeks ago. I was something else, something darker, something wiser, something scarred. I was a survivor, and I would never forget the lighthouse, the keeper's 5 rules, or the horrors that lurked beneath the waves. The sea never truly lets go of what it claims. A part of me would always remain there, lost in the depths, listening to the whispers of the old gods and the mournful cry of the foghorn. The end? Or perhaps just the beginning of a very long, very haunted life. Years later, I found myself drawn back to Oak Haven, not to the lighthouse itself. I couldn't bear to even look at it from a distance, but to the town, to the people who understood the darkness that lingered in the air. I never spoke of what happened on North Point, not to anyone. They wouldn't have believed me. They would have thought I was mad. But I saw it in their eyes, in the way they avoided the subject of the lighthouse, in the hushed tones they used when they spoke of the sea. They knew. They had their own stories, their own brushes with the darkness. I became a fisherman, spending my days on the water, respecting the sea, offering my own silent tributes to its power. I learned to read the signs, to sense the changes in the weather, to anticipate the moods of the ocean. I never looked at the water between midnight and 3 a.m. One day, a young man, barely out of Maritime Academy, approached me at the docks. He had the same naive enthusiasm, the same wide-eyed optimism that I had once possessed. He was the new lighthouse keeper. He introduced himself, his hand outstretched. I looked at him, at his bright, eager face, and felt a pang of guilt. He had no idea what he was getting into. I hesitated, then took his hand, my grip firm. "Welcome to Oak Haven," I said, my voice rough from years of salt and wind. "Be careful out there." He smiled, oblivious to the warning in my eyes. "I will," he said. "I'm ready for anything." I let go of his hand and turned away, walking towards my boat. As I did, I thought about Jared, the old keeper, and the 5 rules he had given me. I wondered if the young man had received the same warning. I wondered if he would heed it. I knew that I should tell him. I should warn him about the darkness, about the creatures of the abyss, about the fate that awaited him on North Point. But I couldn't. The sea doesn't like to share its secrets, and some burdens are too heavy to pass on. I climbed aboard my boat and cast off, leaving the young man standing on the docks, silhouetted against the setting sun. As I sailed out into the open water, I looked back at the lighthouse, its dark silhouette standing against the horizon, and I knew that the cycle would continue. Another keeper would take his place, another sacrifice would be made, and the darkness would continue to lurk beneath the waves, waiting for its next victim. The sea is always hungry, and the lighthouse keeper is always on watch. The knocking, I suspect, will never truly cease. And that, my friends, is the real horror of North Point. Not the monsters in the water, but the endless, lonely vigil, the knowledge that the darkness is always there, waiting for a moment of weakness, a lapse in judgment, a broken rule. Sleep tight, and don't forget to listen for the foghorn. You never know what else might be calling in the night.